Sanctions still need to strike painfully at the most profitable sources of the Muscovite budget. Will they force Kremlin's Putin to stop the war? It's essentially a non-stop battle on opposing courses. This is about the Pokrovsk sector of the front line. In this area, the enemy is once again using armored vehicles for assaults and trying to bring infantry into the city. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense forces are effectively counterattacking there on the flanks. And about drones, planes, submarines. And now there's also an armed unit without any identifying insignia. We'll talk about all this today. This is all of Moscow origin, in the sky, at sea, and just a step away from the interstate border with Western European countries. Has the Kremlin really decided to attack NATO? Hello everyone. This is the operational briefing and review project from the editorial team of Spetskor. To understand the geography of the front, as usual, we will use the online deep state map, which the developers of the resource have allowed us and Spetskor to use in today's program. Military analyst Denys Popovich. Mr. Denys, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Hello? Transcontinental prolonged bombing is not about missiles at all, but it might turn out to be more effective than tomahawks. Although finishing the job with cruise missiles would definitely be even more effective. Did he lose his patience, or was it just for no reason? This time the stars aligned and the US president imposed sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as the largest 36 subsidiary companies connected to the main Moscow oil sources that feed the budget. The restrictions will not take effect immediately. In a month the effect will become noticeable, and apparently in about half a year. But by then, for the Kremlin and Putin over there is a cautious hope that it will be far too late. The shortfall in the war budget that Moscow will have to account for will apparently amount to hundreds of billions of dollars a year. The largest buyers of Russian oil, India and China, seem to have understood the seriousness of the hints and are already gradually redirecting their oil purchases. Putin's special envoy Dmitriev was sent to Washington in an attempt to cover things up. Without agreeing to anything, he promised something. But it seems, at least for now, that it hasn't influenced Trump. This is likely due in no small part to the fact that US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has taken up the Ukrainian issue with both hands. At the very least, they sidelined the lover of chebureks and samovars with kokoshniks, Steve Witkoff. However, we still shouldn't harbor overly rosy hopes. Moscovia, even though it seems that the further it goes, the more it resembles a colossus on clay feet from an aggressive war of assaults along the front lines. At least for now, it is not giving up on the daily bombings of Ukrainian civilian cities. And that's putting it mildly. Denys, I have a question in connection with all of this. In your opinion, will Muscovy be able to adapt to these new restrictions against Rosneft and Lukoil? And has the West, and in particular America, finally started to target truly significant sectors of the Muscovite economy? Sectors that maybe not tomorrow or instantly, but in the short term will have a substantial effect?
Well, it already is having an effect. Lukoil is giving up its foreign assets, putting them up for sale, and this, in principle, is the first signal. The second signal is that India and China are seriously considering how to revise their oil purchases from Russia to other sources. The fact is that the US has started to strike. That's a fact. They imposed sanctions, and we might have complained that it didn't happen sooner, but in the end, it did happen. So we're moving away from that now. Will Muscovy be able to adapt? Yes, it will try to do so. There could be shell companies set up, anything at all. Basically, there are fools there too. They will find some way to do it, to regain some portion of their income, but undoubtedly this will hit their finances. It is already impacting their finances. I'm not an economist, but basically I follow the events and news coming out of Moscow right now, including those from Russian experts who are not... They haven't taken Putin's side, and they are trying to present and analyze everything objectively. Even their military production is starting to slow down now. It's gradually coming to a halt for them. Their military production during the war is beginning to stall, and that was the driver of their economy. And as for civilian and other sectors, there's hardly anything to say. So right now the economy of the Russian Federation is cracking, but how long it will take before it really breaks, that's another question.
Let's take a direct look at the front line, because since the beginning of September there hasn't been a single day at the front when the number of combat engagements has dropped below 150. On peak days it exceeds 200. But it should be noted that currently about 70% of all strikes are carried out using UAVs, that is remotely piloted aerial systems of the operational tactical level. And the range there is 20 to 30 kilometers. For most of them, that's now just a routine working distance. Some of these systems can cover 50 or even hundreds of kilometers. And one of the areas where the intensity of airstrikes and enemy ground assaults practically never stops, not even for a day, is The Kostiantynivka section of the front, let's put it that way, on both sides of Kostiantynivka with both of its flanks there. Around Chasiv Yar, of course, in the northeast along the H32 highway and to the southwest, this is the road that basically runs through the entire sector. And in fact, with the continuous pressure from the Russians, south of Kostiantynivka, and right now this is the sector of the front, specifically the southern part of Kostiantynivka, where the most intense fighting in the sector is taking place. We're talking about the area defined by the H20 highway to the west and currently by a local road, O-05-19, which passes through Bila Hora, Oleksandr Shultain. It basically goes to the city center of Kostiantynivka, and from there leads to Drushkivka, and even all the way to Kramatorsk. The forward assault groups of the Russians, likely from the ranks of the 77th and 101st Motorized Rifle Regiments, at least that's what some open sources suggest, managed to push through to slip between the forward, let's say, defensive lines of the Ukrainians. And in the area on the traverse of Novodmitrivka, again, according to some open sources, this shows that they were even able to cut across, to traverse this H32 highway. And it seems that now the pressure from the Muscovites is coming along the eastern flank from Kostiantynivka, in the area between Pritesheny and the eastern outskirts. Around that same Novodmitrivka, it continues. At the same time, the 72nd Rashist Motorized Rifle Brigade, which was only recently redeployed, was moved here from the 3rd Army Corps, redeployed to the Chasiv Yar area, to replace the 98th Airborne Division from the Kherson region. So they have renewed their pressure literally along the highway, pushing in with a narrow wedge. Again, some sources indicate that the enemy is now present on the road to the northwest of the village of Stupochki. At the same time, the 4th Russian Motorized Rifle Brigade, one of the main combat units of the 3rd Combined Arms Army, together with the main forces of the 150th Motorized Rifle Division of the 8th Combined Arms Army, at the same time from the east, south and southwest, they are attacking and trying to eliminate a vast Ukrainian defensive area that stretches from the H20 highway through Katerinivka, the village of Klibanbik, and all the way beyond Plishchivka. And to the west of the H20 highway, already directly on the western flank, it seems that Ukrainian soldiers have managed, if not to completely halt, then at least to significantly slow down the advance of the Russian troops. Specifically, the 255th and 1219th Motorized Rifle Regiments of another Motorized Rifle Division of the 28th Combined Arms Army. This is extremely important because all of these are actually roads and routes coming from the southwest as well as from the south. And finally, from the southeast to this highest point above the section, above the Kliban-Bitske Reservoir, the outcome of the confrontation, for which, in my opinion, means a lot. It will determine the success or the duration of the entire subsequent defense of Kostiantynivka and the whole surrounding agglomeration. We now have the opportunity, I hope, to hear more details about the situation in the Kostiantynivka direction straight from the source. Yevhen Alkimov. Yes, we have the press officer of the 28th Separate Brigade named after the Knights of the Winter Campaign on the line. Yevhen, greetings.
Greetings to you. Bye.
Before I ask my question, would like to once again draw viewers' attention to the QR code. This time it's a fundraiser for Prometheus ground robotic systems for the soldiers of the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade. Such GRSs are a great help to our defenders and help save lives. They assist with logistics as well. So if you can please join in supporting this cause, don't stay on the sidelines. Yevhen, my question is first and foremost as clear and concise as possible. Is the enemy currently present in Kostiantynivka?
Yes, small groups of 2 to 3 people are sneaking in now, taking advantage of the bad weather. They aren't showing any particular activity at the moment. Essentially, their task right now is to bring in as many personnel as possible in order to do something there. But for the most part, they're just sitting in basements right now, reporting to their leadership that they're there. And whenever they try to do something, drones immediately show up, just a drone. So that's how it is. They're here, but they're not showing any activity at the moment, and besides, their numbers are currently quite insignificant for them to be able to do anything there at all.
Zhenya, tell me, in your personal opinion and observations, has the war around Kostiantynivka become more intense during October? Or is everything, let's say, staying at the same level? And then, accordingly, my question is, how is it that Moscow is able to do this? How are they managing to infiltrate here, at least to the outskirts of the city?
It hasn't become more intense, basically, in recent times. Yes, as we can see, even now you can move around the city normally if you're on foot. For the most part, the enemy is focusing on destroying our logistics, closely monitoring the approaches to the city, and trying to attack any kind of transport there, including humanitarian convoys. Plus, they are constantly sending their groups through. They are directly opposing us. Specifically, it's the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade, which you showed on the map. Our positions there are actually quite far away, but our resources are limited. As you can understand right now, the line of contact is rather notional because of the complete total control of the sky by drones. Therefore, sometimes the enemy manages to simply wedge himself in through our orders and bring a couple of people there somewhere, and they are already being destroyed. Drones, and now it's mostly a drone war.
So I just wanted to clarify, tell me, right now it's mostly a drone war, so the artillery component and even those close contact firefights, that's an absolutely minimal share of the overall number of battles, as I understand it, right?
As for close contact firefights, they're very rare now because even when the enemy sends in infantry, if the infantry gets into a firefight, the enemy immediately notices it. And then literally everything starts flying there, artillery, drones, until the position is completely destroyed. That's why close contact battles are rare for us now, at least. And for the most part, we use drones. As for artillery, we use it in combination with drones because artillery on its own. Now it's used against small groups of infantry because enemy groups are just 2 or 3 people at most. It's not cost effective to use it, but when a group does appear, for example, artillery is used and it very effectively suppresses these groups while drones finish the job.
Zhenya, I have a question for you at the very end. Tell me, what's the story? I don't know if it was a Russian scout or a saboteur who was captured recently, and notably, it was your artillerymen who did it. What's the story behind this? How did an infantryman end up encountering Ukrainian artillerymen?
Well, he wasn't exactly an infantryman. He's a soldier from the 72nd Brigade, which you mentioned earlier. His task was specifically during bad weather. He was supposed to lead Russian groups so they would gather and concentrate in certain areas. Our artillery unit's operators captured him. That's basically how it happened. Because, well, they break into the combat formations just like that and move through. He either got lost, but he's actually quite experienced. He's been fighting since 2022, fought and led a group there. He managed, I think, to bring in 4 groups there, but we detected all of them basically. He was left alone, started to make his way out, but ran into our guys who were going to retrieve a downed drone. That's actually how he was captured.
Zhenya, thank you for finding the time and opportunity to explain the situation in detail. Take care of yourself and your soldiers. The intensity of the war overall, well, as Yevhen says, it hasn't really increased, but these enemy infiltrations, obviously territorial ones you could say, and unfortunately some of their gains, they are present. And that's even though, as was mentioned, the 51st Army was brought in from here, along with some other forces. Meanwhile, supposedly the same number of troops were not brought in there, although the 150th Division did enter. So my question is, one, what is all this activity really about? It's the rainy season, which is putting pressure on the occupiers. They've stepped up their attempts to reach Kostiantynivka because it's definitely not suitable to attack through the mud. The lack of gains in other directions. Why has such intense fighting flared up around Kostiantynivka right now?
By the way, there was some alarming information that certain individuals are present in Kostiantynivka. There aren't many of them yet, but today there are few. Tomorrow there will be more. And I think today we'll be talking about Pokrovsk as well. The situation there has been developing according to a similar scenario.
But the pattern is noticeably similar, and
Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, all of it. That's exactly how they operate. They infiltrate through the combat lines. Then somewhere they settle in, build up their forces, and after that you see that they've already... Why? In reality, it has never been quiet around Kostiantynivka this year. We even talked about it there about half a year ago, and I actually predicted that Kostiantynivka would be the main focus, but it turned out that Pokrovsk became the main area of fighting in this direction. Because Kostiantynivka is the gateway to Sloviansk-Kramatorsk, the only gateway, and the enemy will keep trying to break through this gateway, so to speak. And this activity is driven by a number of factors. The change in weather, the need to settle somewhere in the built-up areas. It's one thing when you're sitting out in the field and facing snow and rain there. It's another thing when you at least have some
basement
with 4 walls and some kind of roof over your head. That's the first thing. Second, the objective there is, of course, to capture it. No one has cancelled that objective. Third, you have to understand that until recently there was hope not to be a pawn. And before this Budapest, it was necessary to capture as much territory as possible. Fourth, of course, there's the weather. Besides the need for shelter, drones can also operate less effectively. And often there is fog, rain, and so on. That's why they are now actively using, among other things, armored vehicles. There are actually a lot of factors at play here.
Another topic I want to touch on today is, in fact, the threats from the Russians, their saber rattling towards Europe, a kind of hybrid escalation with elements of demonstrative aggression meant to force our Western partners to stop helping Ukraine, or perhaps even actual preparations for a new stage of at least a continental war. That's a big question. But one way or another, Muscovy is getting louder and louder. They're rattling their weapons toward Western Europe, following up their verbal threats. There are increasingly frequent cases of Russian drones violating the airspace of EU countries. Muscovite submarines are surfacing demonstratively near the territorial waters of European countries. And in the first 10 days of October, there was another incident on the land border with Estonia, in the area of the so-called Saetska. This Kremlin boot, where they were testing, I don't know, either the nerves or the endurance of the Estonian border guards, was a kind of unknown unit of little green men, as we call them, without any insignia. Does Putin really have a plan to invade NATO territory, or are all these just elements of Kremlin aggression against Ukraine aimed at weakening European support? All of this was analyzed for us. Ihor Mondarenko.
At the Estonian-Russian border, men in balaclavas, camouflage and armed with weapons frightened the border guards and Estonian police. An armed group without any identifying insignia was spotted in the area of the Saetska boot. This is a protrusion of Russian territory deep into Estonian land. When Tallinn inquired about the presence of little green men, Moscow predictably denied everything. A 1-kilometer stretch of the local road has been closed for a week and a half already.
This is very provocative, and it cannot be viewed in isolation or separately from the overall concept of the Kremlin strategy to destabilize the situation right now. Using methods like these as much as possible, when there is seemingly no direct invasion, no heavy equipment, no troop buildup, but from time to time special units appear, or drones in the air, or other provocations.
With their little green men, Russian terrorists continue to test the civilized world's resolve. The Russians' hybrid war has entered an active phase, as in September dozens of Russian Garand drones began appearing on Polish territory. Before this, drones had periodically entered the airspace of Romania, Moldova and the Baltic states. NATO air defense forces managed to shoot down only 4 out of 19 Shahid imitator drones. That's why the Russians continue to test the readiness of European militaries.
The hybrid war continues. It is already in Europe. And these elements are specifically intended to provoke and incite panic among the civilian population of certain countries, to stir up these countries and their societies, and to foster divisive sentiments.
Already this fall, Russian drones have repeatedly disrupted the operations of major airports in Denmark and Norway. Russian MiG fighter jets violated Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland, remaining there for more than 10 minutes. Unknown drones appeared during NATO countries' military exercises. The submarine Novorossiysk is traveling on the surface through the Mediterranean Sea. Ukrainian experts are convinced that all of this is part of hybrid warfare.
A kind of white noise which is characteristic of hybrid warfare is being created, especially in situations when all sorts of different voices, in a wide variety of forms and formats, appear quite often and frequently. And this creates a certain chaos from the perspective of response. Unfortunately, our European partners turned out to be unprepared for an active response, primarily their intelligence services, to this kind of tactics and style of Russia's hybrid warfare.
Despite Russia's obvious provocations, the head of the North Atlantic Alliance, Mark Rutte, states that there is no danger. They say that the show of force is a sign of weakness, so violators will be gently escorted out.
As long as they don't pose a threat, we'll do it softly. We'll escort them out of our airspace. This is a proportional response. We are much stronger than the Russians. If we were weak, maybe we would have shot them down right away. But since we are stronger, our response is proportional.
The weak response of Europeans to Russian provocations could push the Russian dictator to seize new territories. Such a development is not ruled out by military analyst Mikhailo Samus. The Baltic countries are primarily at risk, especially those regions with Russian-speaking populations. That is why the appearance of armed militants on the Estonian border is no coincidence, the Ukrainian expert is convinced.
To capture Estonia, really, the whole of Estonia, that's a lot. But to carry out an operation to seize a small territory and shake up NATO, as I said, 1 or 2 divisions would be enough, in principle. Of course, they would be of a new format. Again, these would, of course, involve the same methods of infiltration, penetration by small groups. These will be drone-centric units, employing the latest approaches. These are cutting-edge methods, a new doctrine that Europe still cannot grasp or understand what is happening.
The Russian army is bogged down in Ukraine, so the Russists are trying to make moves in Europe. Information provocations, financial support for pro-Russian candidates, the migration crisis, and now even louder saber rattling. The Russians are testing Europe's strength and unity, forcing Europeans to spend more money on their own security instead of helping Ukraine. However, Europe's security begins with Ukraine's security. And it seems that Europeans have started to realize this. Ihor Bondarenko, Ilya Shenkarenko, Spetskor, Marathon, United News.
Denys, there is no doubt that both the Russian UAV and manned aviation and submarines, all of this is entirely deliberate. These are actions by the Kremlin. They are intentional, demonstrative, but what is all this for? Because personally, I don't really believe that all this can scare NATO headquarters. Or maybe it can.
I was at NATO headquarters during the winter week. There's a working atmosphere there, but it's the kind of atmosphere, of peaceful work. I can't say that they were really scared of anything. But to say that war is at the doorstep, that feeling isn't there either. I mean, when there was a general strike in Brussels of transport workers, and when people defend their interests through a general strike of the transport system, of public transport, they clearly understand that they're not thinking about war. That's why Europe right now, at the level of people, of citizens, is not thinking about war. That's absolutely certain, you can say that. And when these drones, these unmanned devices, fly into German airspace, specifically into Germany, people ask, well, who launched them? Yes, it's not Russia, so who launched them? So who launched them? The Poles launched them, the Finns launched them. So the people who make decisions are starting to realize that the situation is threatening, it's tense. But at the level of states, at the level of citizens of society, which will have to fight if a war breaks out, there is no such understanding. So undoubtedly, to answer a question with a question, right now we are seeing these processes taking place. Submarines, planes, drones, and little green men appearing at the border with the Baltic countries. Was this happening a year ago? It wasn't. But now it is. In other words, the situation is getting worse. And it will continue to get worse until Europe starts responding with quicker actions.
It seems that the Muscovites have managed to at least get a hold of the railway line that runs parallel. The M30 highway is the Donetsk-Dnipro road, and it travels through the Dornyak area, and then eventually leads to Pavlohrad, specifically located in the area just north of the local cemetery, providing a key route for those traveling through this region. It's difficult to say how many enemies are present here right now because this is not a massive assault, but rather infiltration, seepage, and accumulation among the ruins of urban, residential, and industrial buildings. One way or another, as of today, the entire southern part of the city, which is located south of the Defenders of Ukraine Avenue, that is the section of the highway that leads from Donetsk to Dnipro, the aforementioned M30 route. There is now a constant enemy presence there in greater or lesser numbers. Sporadic, short-lived clashes flare up there, but of very high intensity. Small arms battles. And in fact, the southwestern flank where the Russians from Molodetsk, which is located on the highway 0406, and through Udakny and Kotlin, it seems they are also trying to form another encircling front there. Maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems that through Serhivka, they're again trying to reach the M30 highway over a wide stretch. And all this is happening under conditions of extremely complicated logistics and the almost simultaneous presence in the sky and on the ground in ambushes of dozens of enemy attack drones. A few details about the situation around Pokrovsk. We have the opportunity, I hope, to hear from the commander of the mechanized battalion of the 32nd Separate Steel Brigade. Iago is on the line with the studio. Iago, welcome.
Greetings to you, gentlemen.
First of all, once again, I would like to address the viewers. The QR code should already be appearing on your screens. This is a fundraiser for drones, DJI Mavic. It goes without saying that drones are now deciding, if not everything, then a great deal. So please join in supporting our defenders. Yaho, last week there was a report that the enemy's 2nd Combined Arms Army received significant reinforcements around mid-October. Various sources cited different numbers, ranging from 6 to 10.5 thousand soldiers. And it was precisely during this period that changes appeared on open source maps, which showed the presence of the enemy, both in Pokrovsk itself and on its western outskirts, tell me, within the defensive sector of your brigade. In this regard, has the intensity of enemy attacks changed and, let's say, the style of the enemy's actions?
Yes, this is clearly noticeable in their movements, in their activity, and in the buildup of enemy forces in this area. Of course, they are not standing still. They are constantly trying to take action and, so to speak, use anti-drone cloaks when moving. They also advance along new routes, constantly changing them, trying to mislead us. Accordingly, we are still working on the approach in a circle zone where we do not allow anyone to advance to our front line. Finding them on the roads, we apply a lot of FPV, we find it ourselves for ages, accordingly open so that we can conduct normally. Intelligence, having detected this enemy on the move.
I am rolling my eyes. All the movements and advances of the enemy that you are talking about, no? These are precisely attempts to move towards our line of defense. Is this an assault action?
In general, these are movements of groups trying to concentrate in a certain area with the intention of further moving and transitioning into an assault. In my battalion, logistics is of course much more complicated because of this. And in general, the enemy uses FPV drones, Zajdain, and everything else at their disposal, including artillery.
In the area of responsibility in the defensive sector of your brigade, does enemy armored equipment appear? Now.
No, it has been absent for a long time. We haven't seen it in a while. The enemy may deploy small groups on motorcycles. 2 days ago, there was an incident where 2 motorcycles with personnel were destroyed. Today, there was also the destruction of a motor vehicle with a generator.
So, there is no armored equipment in the area?
No, it's absent.
In your subjective opinion, since you communicate with your comrades and with neighboring units, in your view right now, are the enemy's main forces, their main strike, focused on Pokrovsk? Or is there a shift of emphasis toward the flanks? In other words, is the enemy trying to create a deep encirclement already into the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region? Or are there no such signs yet?
In my opinion, nothing has really changed. That's why they tried to bypass all the settlements. And everything else, because it's much harder to fight in a settlement than in the open fields.
That is, the attacks are going straight north, straight head on.
Well, partially there, partially changing there, constantly trying, probing.